So, welcome back, everyone. Thank you for watching another edition of these radically remote interviews. Today, we actually are joined by Dr. Linda Nilson. Now, I first came across Dr. Linda Nilson's work with one of my absolute favorite books in the space of online teaching and blended teaching, which is aptly titled Online Teaching at Its Best. Now, she also wrote Teaching at Its Best, but Online Teaching at Its Best specifically focuses on merging instructional design with teaching and learning research. And that was written with her co-author, who is Ludvika Goodson, Dr. Ludvika Goodson, also an awesome human being. So what was interesting about this piece is if you actually look at all the stuff that's been put out there on how to actually do online teaching, the vast majority of it is written by practitioners. It's by people who are out there. It's very practical tips and tricks, all that kind of stuff. And there are a lot of research articles that have been written on online teaching. But until Online Teaching at its best, there wasn't really a wonderful meta study, essentially, in book form that looks at all the different practices, brings them together, and has evidence-based research. On top of that, of course, not only did she write this great work, she also wrote one of my favorite books on, as you know, I do love conversation interaction management. She also wrote one of the best books on this, which is Creating Engaging Discussions. So strategies for avoiding crickets in any size of classroom and online. So between the two of those, she's given a ton back to this, done over 550 keynotes, workshops, conferences, now 551 with this, of course, and was previously heading up and running the Office of Teaching Effectiveness and Innovation. And she's definitely done plenty of that at Clemson University. Thank you, Dr. Nilson, for joining us today. It's a pleasure to have you.
Oh, thank you, Joshua, for having me. This is really a thrill to do this, and a thrill to do this talking to somebody in Hong Kong, 12 hours ahead of me, or right, all the way around the world. So,
exactly, I'm a time traveler. We're 12 hours ahead, and you're dialing in from South Carolina, where I have very fond childhood memories of playing miniature golf with my cousins. So it's a beautiful part of the world. So. To jump right into this, of course, how are you doing? How's everything in South Carolina?
Fine, a little wet, but fine. A lot of rain.
Yes, well, we're with you there. We are in solidarity with a ton of rain. So I guess my first question would be is to touch on your second book, Creating Engaging Discussions. You know, it really looks at different structure and patterns for how we can really practically create these beautiful discussions, especially online. And there are other approaches to this, like, for example, liberating structures. And I'm curious, what are your thoughts on some of their taxonomy, some of their ways of applying this to online conversation?
Well, first of all, thank you for complimenting me on my books. I really appreciate it. But anyway, about liberating structures, I was so impressed. I found them to be really excellent structures with quite a bit of overlap into the academic discussion structures, especially something like think, pair, share. You start off individually thinking and then sharing it in a pair, and then you might go to quads after that. So this sounded, really, and of course, generally you'll share it with a larger group, but this generally felt like home for me. But what I really loved about Liberating Structures was the title, because it sounds like a contradiction in terms, right? A structure should be restraining. That's what you think of, well, it's structured. But really, in the case of Liberating Structures, it's a means for focusing the group on a certain task or a certain question, a certain challenge. And that can be freeing because you've got you've got a path to flow in. And so that's some of the best thinking will go on in that sort of paradoxical state where, yes, there's structure, but hey, they're open questions. You can free, like, you can share all kinds of different thoughts and feel secure doing so. And a lot of these will transfer right over to Zoom. These are all very, in Liberating Structures, all very good ways to get to know your teammates or your fellow participants in the larger group, which is really creates a bond.
Mm.
creates a bond. And it's a beautiful, beautiful thing. So it's sort of like it that's one of the things you want to do with your classroom, online or face to face, is create that sense of community too. So, and this does that. This does that. So, anyway, I want to just talk just about a couple of the liberating structures that I felt so at home with, and also that can go right onto like a web conferencing software like Zoom. So one of them is it's so simple, folks. Anybody can do it. 1, 2, 4, all. And the leader asks the general group, well, any time of open-ended question, and it might be about, let's say, about the prior presentation, or it might be about developing a proposal or solving a problem, sort of a task, if you will. But what's important about this question or task for evoking discussion and reducing insecurity and shyness in the group is that it has multiple respectable answers or solutions. Now, granted, some are going to be better than others, but at least it's easy and safe to stick your neck out.
Mm.
And this, by the way, this is very much a finding out of my world, out of academia, because students can be so shy and so afraid, and they don't want to say anything in the discussion. And this helps you get over this, because it's hard to screw up unless you say something
Best phrase ever.
really, really irrelevant, or that really is totally off the wall. That it creates a very, very safe world, and we need that sort of safety for adults in their work world as well. So if you're going to ask a question or pose a problem, let's say, for people to solve, there should be at least a few different ways of looking at the problem and solving it. And people will come up with them. People will come up with ideas that you, as the leader or the instructor, never thought of. It's really, it's a lot.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I
But
think you're I was
go
going to
on.
say, I think you're absolutely right. I love that you really have honed it into what the meaning of truly liberating structures is. It's this idea that if you just ask a completely open question, just that, you might get those crickets. And people are like, well, what do I do? What am I supposed to do? But if you give people buckets, they will fill those buckets in with ideas that you've never even thought of. And especially cross-culturally, especially cross-linguistically, cross-regionally, it provides that safety net that allows the ideas. It gives them permission to share in a way they might not have otherwise. So that's
Yeah,
fantastic.
I love that buckets analogy. I was thinking of it like a stream has a stream bed, right? And it can flow that way. But I love the bucket. Yeah, they can.
I think streams more poetic than buckets, but we'll go with it. Definitely.
Perhaps. But anyway, back to the structure of 1, 2, 4, all. It's really kind of neat, because you start out where you should start out. The individual does some reflection. The individual thinks, well, what can I contribute to this? Then individuals pair off and they exchange their ideas, oftentimes refining and improving them in the process, or thinking of the two of them thinking of something new that blends their ideas in a richer way. Then the pairs pair off with pairs, right? So you got to force them, and then they exchange the ideas, and then the group of 4 will after talking about all these answers as solutions, they will pick out the one that stood out. And maybe it stood out because it was obviously best, or maybe it just stood out because it was unusual. And you want the unusual ones, because when they share with the general group, with all, you're not likely to get overlap. And so you'll get really fresh views on it. And that's this is beautiful. This is beautiful. Another liberating structure that transfers very well to a Zoom environment is nine whys. And
Yes.
that really, I looked at the title of that and I said, well, I want to find out what this is all about. And this really helps participants clarify what's really essential in their work, really
Mm,
essential. And this helps them as a collective to identify a shared purpose, which is, again, great way to build a team, great way to build a classroom or a community. And this, once they understand shared purpose, well, then they are free. They'll feel freer to say a lot of different things because everybody knows that we're all on the same page. We're all going
It's a community of trust then.
to the same goal. Exactly, community of trust, and they feel responsible to each other as well.
That's actually
So
a good word for it. I like that. Yeah.
yeah, well, then they won't be freeloaders. Say, oh yeah, that's a great idea, but
Exactly. No social loafing going on in the classroom then. And I do love that. It's the idea that it generates new purpose and new
yes,
ideas by taking it levels deeper. That's like for when we do 1, 2, 4 all, even with their answers, we give them a little extra nudge usually where we ask them to categorize them. What's an answer that you think the rest of the group has come up with? And then on the other side, share one answer that you think nobody else in the room has come up with. So it's
oh
just
boy,
like just an extra little tiny nudge that's like, well, oh, so it's just encouraging that think different, so something a
yes,
bit different there. Not saying
yes.
it's good or bad, but just different, just to get the ball rolling. Oh,
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
fantastic.
exactly, and you get, in a way, creative juices flowing as well. So anyway, well, so back to nine whys because I haven't even gotten to the first why. Okay, but
Yes.
anyway, the leader asks the individuals, and then in in pairs, and then groups of four. What do you do when you are working on whatever, a
Mm,
challenge, a problem, some sort of subject matter? What do you do? And then the leader asks, why is that important to you?
mm,
And that starts the series of whys. And what the leader does is the leader keeps asking why, until up to 9 times, until the participants can't go any deeper. And by that time, they have come to the fundamental purpose of their work,
mm.
and they have identified their common ground, their common purpose. And it's a great little exercise for, again, team building, community building. Now, not all the liberating structures transfer so easily into a web conferencing environment. I wish
True.
they did, but some of them are strictly face to face, like impromptu networking. That doesn't, and because you've got to have the milling around the room sort of business, and I don't know how you do that in Zoom. If you figure it out, you let me know. Uh,
Ooh,
oh,
I have
oh,
some
oh,
things to share with you then.
well, I can't wait. Well, then there's also 25-10 crowdsourcing, because it generates such powerful ideas. But anyway, so tell me how you mill around the room in Zoom.
So you're familiar with with open space technology, where it's the methodology where people are able to float freely from area to area. In Zoom, they have something called the co-host trick, where if you actually elevate everybody in the Zoom room to co-host level, then when they go to breakouts, they're not you no longer control where they go in breakouts. They're actually able freely to move from room to room. So
Oh,
it can recreate that milling about experience, not as perfectly by any means as a face-to-face. You're absolutely right. So that's always the challenge that we put forward to everybody listening to this. If you see
yes.
one that you think can't be recreated, hey, give it a shot. Not saying we need to
Talk to
recreate
Joshua.
everything.
He'll tell you how to do it.
No. Only one or two of them. Only because I want to give people freedom in the classroom to move around sometimes. It's thinking
Yes.
about how can we let those structures free people.
Yeah. It was surprising to me, when I look at my book, and then I look at Liberating Structures, and it's so interesting, the similarities that among the group activities of private industry and governments,
Mm,
employees, and colleges and universities with students, because it all gets down to learning And it all gets down to thinking creatively or thinking critically, depending on what the task requires.
Exactly.
So I was really, I felt very at home with Liberating Structures and wanted to go rewrite my book on discussions and put some of those in there, and because they were so neat. They were a lot of fun.
It is a lot of fun. It is absolutely a lot of fun. So I'm actually curious. I mean, Liberating Structures and your book, and just in general, using these structured approaches
Yes.
to having deeper dialogue, to be more critical, be more creative, is one of the I would say face-to-face or online. It's a fantastic way to, in a way that's not too hard, bring it to a better place, a more effective workshop. I
Yeah.
guess from all the stuff that you've read with people going online, what do you think, because we've got so many new facilitators moving online, what do you think are some of the big things that they forget to do when they make that offline to online transition? Especially because you wrote Teaching at Its Best and Online Teaching at Its Best, so you're in a very unique position to be able to go, haha, I can actually tell you. What are the things people miss?
Yes, there are two things that people tend to miss. First of all, they don't integrate enough interactivity. And you've got to give your students or your participants something to do when you're, especially when you're in an online environment, in a Zoom environment, at least every 10 minutes. And that you really got to get familiar with the features. And I wasn't familiar with this wandering around from room to room, but like breakout groups, polling, opening up the chat box. But again, not just to idle chatter, but to, asking certain kinds of questions or answering certain kinds of questions. And that's great. The other thing that people forget to do is to integrate enough individual reflection tasks and the time to reflect.
Yes.
So this is, I call this interactivity on the inside.
I love that phrase.
Yeah, you're interacting with yourself. And that's, I like self-regulated learning. I wrote a book on that too. And when I give a talk on it, or I give a presentation, a workshop is really what I'm doing, I call it active learning on the inside, because what you're asking your students to do is to observe themselves, to talk to themselves about their thinking, to think critically on the inside. And it's totally active. You don't have to go out and like do something, or have people chattering, which is fine, or to have them doing a lab or any of these things. Active learning is done in your head. It's done in your mind. And people forget that. They think it's something you do with your hands or whatever. And it's not. And like even if you have people writing, the action's going on in here, not in your hand, right?
Correct.
So anyway, so because it really helps you to learn when you are observing yourself, when you're being critical about yourself, or just observing, just figuring out what your mind is doing. So you're thinking about your thinking processes, about what you are learning that you didn't know before, about insights you are having. So you're learning not only about the task at hand, but you're learning about yourself. And if you can observe your thinking, you can improve your thinking. And if you don't know how you're thinking, how are you going to improve it? Right. Well, anyway.
That's actually a phenomenal piece of advice. And one, I think that most of us, so many facilitators, we're going online, we get so nervous to give people that alone time, that space, because it's in the Zoom with that gallery view or things like that. It's even more, we're more aware of, oh God, it's 5 minutes. So we always do try to time box it to give people that space. Because if they're not reflecting, it's just, they're either absorbing, interacting with us, interacting with each other, and there's no point where it's really becoming embedded within the mind and being allowed to process in a way that allows them to take it to that next level. I think you're absolutely right about that. That's fantastic.
Yeah, and we don't do that in the classroom either, because we can't stand silences, crickets as we call them, and there is a place, a time and a place for crickets.
Exactly. Intentional cricketing. Exactly.
Yeah, intentional cricketing, but cricketing for a really good purpose. And if you don't have that interactivity, and you don't have that reflection time, you know what people do, especially in a Zoom environment? They try to multitask, right? Right?
Yes,
Yeah. And
completely.
so, they'll start texting or doing email, or I don't making a laundry list, like literally a laundry list of what
Mm,
they're going to get at the grocery, but there's grocery store. But and this is sad because the part of your brain that you use to text or to do email, whatever, is the same part of the brain that you use when you are doing the sort of tasks that we are asking people to do, that we want
mm.
people to do, the sort of answer the sort of questions, to think about these sorts of things. And then they're not thinking about it, right? They're off trying to do something else, because really what you have when you're using the same part of the brain to do two different tasks, you do neither, or you do
Mm.
neither well. Let's put it that way. It get a
Yeah.
mental, a brain bottleneck, and which causes stress, and also tends to generate error. So you're doing no good. Now, of course, you can walk and chew gum at the same time, right? You can you
One
can walk
hopes so, yes.
at the same time. Yeah, some of us can anyway. Uh, and so there's certain things. Yes, you can watch television or at least listen to music, whatever, and iron at the same time. I don't know if people iron anymore, but anyway, those are two things. You can cook and listen to music at the same time, right? Because you're using different parts of your brain. So that's fine, but not with the sort of tasks that we facilitate,
Mm.
or we want our students to do, or when in class, or on Zoom, or what have you. So we've got to keep our participants occupied on the task at hand.
That makes perfect sense. And it makes perfect sense that if we're just basically overloading their brain with it, just too much us talk or too much of this pair talk, without giving that breathing room, but a structured breathing room where they're going inside, their brain's going to go, I need a break, I need a break. And that's when they're
Yeah,
going to start multitasking. So
yeah,
you've got to give them room to self-manage their attentional drift by providing those reflective moments. And I think that that's absolutely fantastic. I
yeah,
think more of us we should count at least 10% of our training should be intentional cricketing. If it
yeah.
doesn't exist, then it's
I
just,
like
so count
that.
the crickets, count those crickets well.
Oh, that
Do
is
we have,
such a good book title.
it's your next one. It's your next one.
Intentional cricketing. Oh, that'll make them think, right? But
Exactly.
anyway, go on.
So I am conscious of our time. Would it be all right if I ask you one more? Have we got time for one more question?
Oh, sure.
Yes.
I wish we had time for more
Oh
questions.
my goodness, I'm always happy to. I'm always happy to. I just don't
I
want to
don't
take
want.
too
I
much of
don't want to
your
block your
evening.
time, your morning.
Well, I'm just always curious, because you've observed so many things. What's the most actually interesting virtual session you've seen, experienced, or led? I'm just always curious if you.
Yes, it's been built around a case that was
Okay.
relevant to the issue at hand, whatever that was. And it was also, even if it was short, it was
Hmm.
distributed to participants in advance, so they could look at it in advance and sort of begin to think about it, think about the
Gotcha.
problem. So for people who might not know what a case is, it is a real or a realistic story. And you know how people love stories, that put the main person or the main team into a problematic situation or a dilemma of some sort.
Mm.
A good case has uncertainty and risk in it, just like reality does. And the participants have to go through certain steps. That's the right way to do it, to go through certain steps, to devise a best solution or a best resolution. And again, in a good case, there's usually more than one option. There may be a few options. Exactly.
Yes.
Right? And that's why you can create your own. But
Mm.
I also counsel you that the standards for a really good case are pretty high.
They are.
So, but anyway,
There's those yearly case contests. It's so hard. People don't realize it's harder than it looks to write a good case. So like a
yeah,
lot of the best schools like Harvard and stuff, they have actual case contests for their graduate students where your winning thing is, I wrote a really good case.
yeah,
But That does completely resonate with me, though, the idea of multiple possible answers. I did run one case with a firm where the CEO at the end, he's like, and we had said, so it's more about how you got to the decision rather than the decision itself. Focus on process rather than the ultimate choice you make, because we're all different. He comes up to me during the break. He's like, no, Joshua, I got to know what's the right answer. I was like, no. I'm going to call him Sam. Just random name. His name's not Sam, but I'm like, Sam. No, there isn't a right answer. It's about how you got there. And so there's good and less optimal processes, but ultimately it's the process we're interested in. He still wouldn't give it up. He's still like, no, I need to know the right answer.
What is the meaning of life, right? Joshua, give me the answer. What is the meaning of life? There's only one right answer.
Exactly.
So yeah, it's sort of like that, because really you're asking the participants to really imitate reality.
Yeah.
And this is how you learn. This is how you learn one of the best ways to learn problem solving. And to get practice in doing it as well. And of course, the first thing you've got to do, the first step, is to define the problem, because oftentimes there are multiple possible definitions, and you first ask yourself, well, whose problem is it? Because sometimes it's not the person's problem, or you might think.
Totally.
Who's got the real stake in this? And then what exactly is the problem? Then you want to ask yourself, okay, well, let's brainstorm some ways to solve the problem. That would be the next step. But you haven't cleaned anything up yet, right? You've just brainstormed. Fine. Then you want to think about, well, listen, what values, what priorities do I want that best solution to honor? And this is where you start to narrow down. What are your values? What's your purpose? And finally, you evaluate your alternatives to select the best one. But in that process, you are realizing the trade-offs, and you're looking at problems of cost and feasibility, and really who's not being advantaged by this decision. And
who prefers the status quo?
What might be the fallout, right?
Exactly.
And so what should you prepare for if you do go this way, because it does seem to be the best? What fallout should you be ready to deal with? So anyway, I could give you some examples of cases, but I don't know that you need that. Let me just give you one short one.
I love that you're basically all these ways of doing structure perspective taking. So we're checking our assumptions in the problem. We're checking, oh yeah, it's a great idea. Okay, well, who doesn't think it's a great idea? Well, it's a great idea. I was like, well, you didn't think about who didn't think it's a great idea. So
yeah, exactly.
I'd love an example. That sounds great.
Well, this is a very short one, but it comes from my neck of the woods. It's a faculty development or educational development case. And it's so cute. It's not cute. I'm sorry. It really isn't cute at all. A couple of weeks after the final exam, a student with a poor grade in your course approaches you saying that her performance will seriously worsen her father's heart condition. And in the middle of the meeting, she breaks into tears. Now, if we've been in academia long enough, we've been there or something very similar. And you've got to always ask yourself, whose problem is this? Is it your problem? Is it her problem? The student, is it the father's problem? And you really have to look at this from different angles, even though it's a simple little 2-sentence case. And there's not that much to it, but you can get into Harvard Business School cases, and they can go dozens of pages. But
some of them are way too long.
Yeah, way
too long.
Yeah, and they cost a lot of money too, so they're way too expensive. But anyway, they are real stories about real companies facing real problematic situations, and hopefully your students can't all remember well, it doesn't matter whether they remember how the company dealt with it or not. What's, what would have been the best way of dealing with it. So anyway, but those are pretty good. Those, I mean, they're very good, but they sort of like leave you in the middle of nowhere. These cases versus leaving you with, like, well, in the middle of the meeting, she breaks into tears. Okay, that's a great way to end it, right? Because
Yeah,
somebody's got a problem. It's pretty,
exactly.
yeah,
You're putting someone in the woods and saying, survive. Let's see
yeah,
how you deal. How do you deal with this? It's not
right,
a simple yes, no answer. And I
yeah,
think that that's great. When you, uh, Elaine Beach, also another educator that I really love in the teaching space, she said that, she looks at that curve of where sometimes creating struggle is a positive experience. We don't want to spoon feed everything. We want people to engage in this active problem solving, and
yes,
that, oh, I don't know how to deal with this. That's a great first response to a case.
yeah.
If your first response is, I'm not sure what to do with this, or over assumptions, oh no, we should just do this. Either of these polarizing extremes. Well, how do we deal with either of those? And I think that that's fantastic. Yeah.
Yes, and the thing is, I'd rather hear I don't know what to do with this
Mm.
than, oh, let's do this. Let's jump into this
Oh, it's
problem without
obvious.
thinking about it. Yeah, exactly. And but sometimes you let a student do that so
Mm.
they see what the fallout's going to be, or usually some other student will point, or other students will point this out to them,
Yeah.
and and they listen to each other. They really do. But yeah, I love cases, and that's some of the best sessions, either like in a Zoom environment or face to face, that I've ever seen going on, because people get involved in it.
Mm.
You were put into the situation, and it's almost like a simulation,
It is.
or role play. You get that feeling from it, like, oh, this is my problem. Oh my. And
Exactly. It's amazing how people take ownership of it. It's so hard to pull them out sometimes at the end. You're like,
yes,
wait, you're no longer in the situation. No, 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 no. This is real. I'm like, breathe, breathe. Now we're going to be discussing it. Step away.
yes,
Yeah,
yes, you're not alone. You're in your group of four, okay?
exactly.
And you're talking about this, and it's kind of interesting when you're talking about like debriefing a case and what you can do in Zoom or in a classroom, how you divvy up the task of debriefing among the different groups. I mean, you can have all groups working on the same case if it's a complicated enough case, and there are enough enough possible widely differing
Mm.
interpretations of the case. So you can do it that way, and you can say, okay, try to reach a consensus, or if not, majority rules. And then you
Yeah.
limited time, right? You're timing this, so limited time to do this. So they've got to get right to the task. Or you can have all groups working on the same case, but with different groups working on different debriefing questions.
Mm.
Or you can have a general discussion where the larger group or the classroom agrees on what the problem is, but then half the groups think about devising solutions, and half the groups think about um, devising preventions. How
Gotcha.
could this have been prevented? And
Mm.
that's a whole different set of questions, right?
Going upstream rather than
Yeah,
the
yeah,
downstream action.
exactly, exactly. Or you can ask each group to work on a different case and present a descriptive summary and debriefing to the rest of the group. It only makes sense if the cases have something in common. So
Yeah.
you're are talking about the same material at least. So anyway, yeah, and
It's
I
what
could talk
it's really
about
it.
all day. I love them.
I do as well. It's encouraging people to play with ideas, and it's doing it in a way that they feel passionate about. And I think sometimes we don't give people enough time and space to do this.
Yeah.
But even in a 90-minute to 2 hour Zoom session, especially if you have a series of them lined up over spaced weeks, it can be done fantastically well. So
Yeah.
it's something that I'd really encourage people to do, and I thank you for bringing that to us.
Oh,
Any closing thoughts or advice for the awesome audience who's listening?
Well, okay, yes. This it's called metacognitive reflection, where you're,
Hmm.
observing your own thinking. Um, it's neat when people share their insights into their own thinking, their insights into their own way to approach problems, because not only is it just fascinating to get in somebody else's head, but
Yeah.
you might want to try on for size their way of approaching a problem where you might not have done that before. But a whole other set of reflection questions that can be very beneficial are reflection questions about how your group of like four performed,
Mm.
how about group processes, about the group dynamics. For instance, what did you learn about group processes in your breakout group? How did your group handle disagreement and conflict? And could there have been a better way than what you folks did? Um, how even was the participation on the task? And if it wasn't so uneven, why do you think or if it wasn't so even, why do you think it wasn't?
Mm.
Um, what solutions did your group come up with that you never would have thought of yourself? And what does this tell you about the problem solving abilities of groups versus individuals?
I love that, especially
Yeah,
those last two. It's just getting people to realize that this is a process that actually works, and takes
yeah,
us to somewhere we didn't expect. We've got a lot
yeah,
of good ideas.
yeah,
Everyone's got a lot of good ideas.
yeah,
But just getting it all out there so that we can play off each other's ideas and create something new.
yeah.
That actually really is where we get some momentum going.
Yeah.
That's
Synergy,
fantastic.
we call it. It's a beautiful thing.
Exactly.
It's
Exactly.
magic.
It is. It does feel. You get into those moments of magic in the classroom, and I think that it is really something that's possible virtual online. And I just want to give a huge thank you for all your time you've allowed for us to peer into your own thinking, your own brain in this, so that we can get a lot more of these facilitators and teachers who are new to this, especially in the online space, being able to do it in a much more meaningful way, not only for themselves but for all of their participants and learners. So thank you
Well,
so much for.
thank you for this opportunity, Joshua. It's been an absolute pleasure. Talk about what I love, right? So
It is, and it's been a pleasure. We can tell that by how you talk about it. We can feel the passion, and it's really been an absolute gift getting you to have the chance to share with everybody else with that. So thank you so
thank
much,
you.
and I hope you have a wonderful, slightly rainy day in South Carolina. Yeah, but hopefully the sun comes out. The sun should come out soon. That's my hope.
Yes.
Thank you.
Take care, Joshua.